Greetings, everyone. My name is Lehloonolo Peega, and today I'll be making my propositions and submissions around a possible take and policy position of South Africa and Africa's take into 4IR. That's my presentation's title, and this is the opening page. This is the general overview of my presentation and the structure it will take. I'll go through the terminology, I'll localize 4IR, I'll put forward my proposition, the possibilities of my proposition, and at the end of my presentation will be the sources. So in terminology, what is 4IR? The demon that is 4IR that we are gathered here today to talk about is the literal merging of two worlds, the technological world and the human world, to being one where they coexist and support each other for a better future. And then the other relevant term in my presentation will be the creative age. The creative age is an era where the primacy or the driver of the economy is creativity, which I put forward that we're in that particular age. Sorry. Yeah. Now, we go to the next relevant terminology in my proposition, which is creative economy. Creative economy is the interplay between human creativity as it relates to intellectual property, it relates to technology and knowledge. And the final terminology that this one I've actually coined myself from all the works I've been reading, I call it the autonomy of creativity. And the autonomy of creativity is the opportunity presented by artificial intelligence that then takes over the manual functions of humans. And as a result, humans have and can focus on creativity. 4IR in Africa. What does 4IR mean for Africa? What does it look like? So it's important to ask these questions so as to understand and localize 4IR in our context. So the first and the second industrial revolutions were about the enhancement of muscle power. The steam train, electricity was literally about the quick production of work or, the enabling of muscle power as it be, to say, how do I then use one vehicle, instead of 1,000 horses, 1,000 horsepower in that sense. So it was about that idea of pushing muscle power and enhancing it. And then whilst the third industrial revolution and the fourth, what it presents, it's about the enhancement of brain power. Because with the adage of the computer and the internet, we now started to see a new sort of dynamic in society, of the lazy employee who sits in front of a computer, just pressing the computer in an air-conditioned office every day, whilst, somebody argues that the hard labor of a mine worker, the hard labor of a gardener is whatever argument they want to make. So there's this now new dichotomy that gets presented by the introduction of the third industrial revolution and now the fourth industrial revolution. And now the fourth industrial revolution threatens to even change the way we know things and change the way of life. It's no longer the point that now we've reduced 50 workers from the factory floor to 10 that just manage the machines that are on the factory floor. But fourth industrial revolution threatens to even take out the worker from the factory floor in total, where we put in robots that will automate the process and make everything new. So it threatens to change that. And, that becomes a very worrying, understandably so, idea to especially the very lay person in Africa. as it relates to developmental issues and questions in Africa, where we're speaking about unemployment, to say how do we then lose jobs when we already have high unemployment, and these developmental challenges now breed a sort of distrust within the people and for IR. And we ought to now ponder on the question of what does that then mean, where we are in Africa and we have a majority of the people who, and some would argue that it's normally the case that people are generally anti-change. But in the African context, this anti-change takes a particular shape that needs conversation. When we talk about load shedding in South Africa, how do we then imagine smart TVs, smart fridges when we don't have electricity? When in Ofimvaba, you hardly have cell phone connection, but we're already speaking about 5G when we have not mastered 2G or 3G, So these developmental challenges where we have very unstable Wi-Fi, or argument's sake, how does that then affect even our mere imagination, relationship, and our take into 4IR, and hence to even rally society back, we need to imagine what 4IR means for us as a people. We need to determine the agenda for ourselves and say, okay, what is this 4IR? How does it look in Ofimvaba? How does it look in Kampala? How does it look in Lusikisiki? How does it look in Stone Town? So it's very important that we start to imagine. And my proposition is that this imagination is only possible within the realms of art, because we know the ability of art to rally society, the ability of art to imagine worlds that are really not there at that particular point. We know the ability of art to innovate. So my proposition is that art captures this important role of rallying a layman in Bulawayo, to the ideas and ideals of 4IR. And this is particularly necessary and particularly true in considering that the future of work as we enter 4IR, as we dabble in that and going forward, it's really in the creatives themselves. And I'll explain what I mean about that. If you check in current day, there's literally no company that doesn't have a social media presence, a social media interaction, which then needs content creators, which needs graphic designers, to really interact with their clientele and have an interactive space also even for their workers themselves in the company. So understanding that now it's literally a point where there's now a general shift of jobs, where now the labor physical intensive jobs that were being boosted in the first and the second industrial revolution are now moving, and now we're focused more on thinking. And the 4IR were now focused, even our thinking is in the creative roles, to say, how do we creatively imagine a society that is different? In banks currently, a lot of chartered accountants are losing works because now their roles are being programmed into a particular software, and we find creatives having to come with creative models, business models. So there's this word of creative, as we enter this creative age, and we know the kind of force that the content creators have, the influencers, and how much money it's in that, that creative economy itself, to say it's the new mines, it's the new gold, it's there literally. So I am saying it's important that we now determine our own 4IR agenda. And that agenda has to be spearheaded or we have to put the financing, we have to put the sponsorship, we have to put the investment into the arts, so that it starts to shape or we start to imagine what this 4IR looks like. I can already imagine a movie of a child in Putadichaba, a 4IR, there's a smart TV in this movie. This child is already imagining how Putadichaba and the reality of Putadichaba would look like with a smart TV, would look like with robotics, And I want to say that the movie Black Panther, the reason it was so profound is that we for the first time saw this implication of having this much technology in an African context. So the mere imagination of that level of technology in Africa made this movie so powerful to show the point that our imagination was fueled, our imagination was sparked by this. And as true as that may be, is that much of our understanding and interaction with these ideas of robotics, artificial intelligence, 5G, and what these are possible of doing, or even contrary, which becomes the counter argument against this, really comes from movies, I Am Robot, Black Panther, and the likes. So I put that proposition that an investment in the arts or the foregrounding of the arts is going to, first of all, rally society, give us an imagination of this, and also is that the practical problems that arise out of the art become the innovations that are needed to run this fourth industrial revolution, and to determine, because we would be faced with practical problems in the African context of how do you shoot in a situation where there's no infrastructure. Examples like that, for instance, now there's a current problem that we're having, about Zoom latency. And it's especially relevant to musicians, During the lockdown, there was that necessity to run music lessons using Zoom. And then there was always an issue of latency to say these classes are just not happening. And then the question was, how do we make it possible? So from that question, then there's that possibility of innovation. How do you use audio movers as a possible software to gather against Zoom latency? How do you match that together? Another example I can use is Dr. Jill Weinberg from Georgia Tech Center for Music Technology. So his work is around making robots that improvise in music. So they simply listen to you and then they make the musical interventions. From this work that he did, then Jason Barnes, who happened to be a drummer and lost his arm at a very young age, reached out to him and say, I really want to be playing again. Can you develop a prosthetic for me that can allow me to play the way I used to play? And from this interaction, because now musically you need to have the sensibility and the dexterity, to have different articulations and different emotions expressed. So that particular problem led to this doctor, Dr. Jill, developing this prosthetic that can read the sensory nerves within the limb itself and transfer them to the prosthetic so that the prosthetic hand is able to grab either tight or loosely the stick. And then that now started to be a thing which there's so much possibility for the hand. It means now even a person who's not involved in the arts can use this prosthetic either to write, because now there's a level of fine-tuning that this prosthetic has gone through that can be used for everyday life. Another reality is virtual reality. Another example, Virtual reality, as we understand it, definitely needs to be produced like a movie, right? And when we understand that virtual reality needs to be produced like a movie, we then understand the role of the creative to say, let's imagine, and it's not even a far-fetched idea, that we are doing away with physical offices, but going towards virtual offices now. Because COVID has taken us there. Now, how does this office look like? How does it feel like? How does it become alive and it doesn't become depressing and very sad? It's the role of the creative to give it the flair, to design the office space, to design the landscape in itself. And this is already we're seeing something like this, like in the Lion King production, the new one, the recent Lion King, where they animated a world but had to put virtual reality goggles to enter the virtual world to decide on where they're going to position themselves within the virtual reality world to show for particular shots that they were wanting when the wildebeest were coming and all that. So they could have just had the virtual world and put the animals, but it wouldn't give the feel that they were going for, which was a documentary feel. So the director, the cinematographer, the cameraman entered the virtual world using virtual reality goggles and decided on the angles that they're going to be shooting like you would normally do in life. And this, of course, opens a massive possibility. And then my 5 Casper in your vest idea is that with this new font idea is that we now have a possibility of presenting, let's say, a Casper in your vest in 5 different cities at the same time via holograms, for argument's sake, or virtual reality. And this can then now address the issue of affordability to say somebody that is a fan of Casper in your vest, for instance, is able to now afford to watch the virtual reality version of Casper in your vest. And the other possibility now is that there's a creation of new jobs like data curator. So the argument of we're losing jobs doesn't really hold water. It just happens that jobs are shifting focus away from the physical kind of mundane jobs to now the brain and creative jobs. So we need to then position ourselves as a country, as a continent, to understanding this move and then starting to invest there and curbing things, societal ills like poverty, the triple threat. And then there's also opportunity to develop a new framework around IP, because now when things can be modeled according to the robot can play music. Whose intellectual property is that? And how does those things speak back? So this presents a new opportunity to rethink what IP is. And already people are making headway around that with the entire blockchain technology and all those ideals. So that's my very short intervention or submission around this idea of 4IR and how do we reimagine and the possibilities of 4IR in Africa. And my proposition is that it's only within the arts and the funding of the arts that we can start by simply imagining we have already conquered, the possibilities of this thing. Because with the movies that we can make, the music that we can make, we can not only just imagine, but we can even practically solve innovative questions and ideas that can assist society. Hence, in my closing statement is that the power of the human race is in giving life to AI. And this life, unfortunately, as it currently stands, or fortunate enough, is within creatives. So creatives are the ones who are giving AI life, who are giving all these robots and all these other ideas. So creatives are the ones who are giving those ideas to 4IR. I thank you, and these are my sources. Thank you.